Under the Shadows, Unveiling Global Chemical Warfare Experiments. What if your quiet hometown had unknowingly been the site of chemical warfare experiments? During the Cold War era, secretive military operations tested chemical agents in our skies, seas, and neighborhoods without public consent. Today, we're uncovering the grim truths behind these dangerous global experiments. In the 1950s and 1960s, the UK launched Operation Large Area Coverage, Operation LAC. Planes crisscrossed British airspace, releasing zinc-cadmium sulfide to study its dispersal patterns in the atmosphere. This toxic substance, now linked to cancer risks, was sprayed over millions without their knowledge. To investigators, LAC was about understanding how chemical agents might spread during an attack. To citizens, it was a silent betrayal. The government's justification for national security collided starkly with the health and ethical consequences stemming from these covert tests. In 1952, the UK's Operation Cauldron took its experiments offshore. The military released bubonic plague and brucellosis bacteria near Scotland to study how infections spread among animals like guinea pigs and monkey's mice. These animals were placed in cages near the release site. After the tests, many of these animals died from exposure, indicating the effectiveness and lethality of the biological agents. Although conducted at sea, the threat of these pathogens spreading to civilians loomed ominously. Remarkably, a fishing boat unknowingly sailed through one of these test zones. Authorities tracked the boat for months, fearing a catastrophic outbreak. While no outbreaks occurred, classified documents exposed how hazardous and deeply unethical these efforts were toward human and environmental safety. Porton Down is infamous for its decades-long chemical and biological agent experiments. Beginning in World War I and continuing through the Cold War, this top-secret site subjected soldiers and unwitting civilians to nerve agents like sarin, mustard gas, and VX. More than 20,000 participants were lured under the guise of voluntary experiments for national defense. However, many fell sick or died due to exposure. Public inquiries years later revealed not only physical harm, but also a chilling disregard for the victims' dignity and rights. Canada's Suffield Experimental Station followed similar lines, testing chemical agents such as mustard gas on soldiers during World War II. Many recruits were unaware of the true nature of these trials, only realizing the long-term health impacts decades later. In Australia, experiments in the outback featured nerve gas and defoliants, revealing how former colonies often bore the brunt of imperialist militarism. These remote locations became silent witnesses to dangerous emissions, kept deliberately far from urban scrutiny. Meanwhile, France and the Soviet Union carried out their own tests, underlining the global race to perfect chemical warfare. From arid Algerian lands to Siberian tundras, these powers left scars both visible and hidden. One cannot discuss chemical experimentation without delving into Nazi Germany's atrocities. During World War II, concentration camps became sites for testing lethal gases like Zyklon B. Prisoners were subjected to brutal experiments, reflecting an unthinkable dehumanization that darkened history forever. Nazi chemical weapon development also influenced Cold War rivalries, as Allied and Soviet forces competed to gain access to the scientists and data behind these horrifying initiatives. The ethical fallout continues to haunt us as we reflect on the dangers of unchecked power. From sarin to cadmium sulfide, the substances used in these experiments were chosen to maximize harm. Many caused immediate sickness or death, while others posed long-term cancer risks. Over time, survivors and their descendants reported debilitating illnesses linked to exposure. Testing methods varied, from spraying agents via planes and ships to confined chambers of death. The lack of informed consent or legal oversight allowed governments to gamble with human lives on a massive scale, eroding public trust when these actions finally surfaced. For populations unwillingly exposed to these trials, the consequences were devastating. Soldiers, civilians, and entire communities were left grappling with unexplained illnesses, shattered trust, and a lack of official accountability. These stories highlight the deep moral cost of sacrificing lives for militaristic gain. In today's world, these experiments serve as grim warnings. As technology evolves, so does the potential for secrecy and abuse. Greater transparency, ethical oversight, and public awareness are essential to preventing such dark chapters from repeating themselves. The shadowy history of chemical warfare experiments challenges us to seek justice for those affected and demand higher ethical standards. Only by unearthing these truths can we honor the lives disrupted and ensure our future remains free from similar exploitation. If this story chills you, share it, spread the knowledge, spark discussions, and support efforts for greater governmental transparency. Stand with us in calling for accountability and a world where humanity prevails over hubris. Together, we can keep the past from repeating.